I am a former colleague of Stein, who was here to present earlier, driving blockchain and monitor Deloitte just from Copenhagen instead of Oslo. Joined Tradeshift in October last year. And just out of curiosity, a lot of people over the past couple of years have asked, as the first thing when they go on stage, how many here have heard about blockchain or Bitcoin? And I'm not going to ask that. How many have heard about Tradeshift before? Okay, so like 1/3 in the room. That's good. Because that means I will spend maybe a little bit more time on point one, given that we only have 15 minutes. These are my key takeaways, so hopefully we will go through them all. The first one is Tradeshift is digitizing B2B commerce by connecting companies. Tradeshift has been doing that for almost 10 years now. In Frontiers, we are then testing out integrated payments and invoice tokenization, and we are doing that through what we like to call smart invoices, so basically combining invoicing with smart contracts. We see both process efficiency gains to be had by doing that, and also new business models that we can create on top. So that's it. If you feel like coffee, by all means. But let's dig in. And the first thing that we have here is an invoice from around 1800 before Christ. What we see here, the small round dots, they are bags of gold that was owned from what you have in the pictures. And if invoicing and business administration feels like carving things into stone, then you can comfort yourself by the fact someone actually used to do that. So today, luckily, we have the web, we have printers, so now we can still do invoicing much smarter than a couple of thousand years ago. However, we are still doing it in ERP data silos. So the B2B data silos are not connected. And when Tradeshift started in 2010, that was the case. And the three founders who created e-invoicing for the Danish government, making the Danish government the first one in the world to have that, what they saw was that you had Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and all these social media platforms taking off. So your digital graph as a consumer was way more complex than it was as an enterprise or company. So that is what it looked like over there. Which brings us to the vision of Tradeshift, which is to connect every company in the world and thereby creating economic opportunity for all. The way we go about doing that is by building technologies that help businesses grow and giving them access to cheaper capital, increased efficiency, and digital global trade. So this is the vision and mission statement of Tradeshift. And it's going fairly well with that. So last year, the latest round of funding was secured with $200 million with Goldman Sachs as the lead investor. We are now more than 1,000 people worldwide, and there's approximately $500 billion that is transacted on the network annually. And 10 of the 1,000 people that are working in Tradeshift are in Tradeshift Frontiers. It is led by one of the three co-founders, Gert Sylvest. So that is my boss, and Alex, who is also here as boss. And we're looking at artificial intelligence, blockchain, and IoT. And really, I am part of driving on the commercial side what we're doing on blockchain, which is what we are here to talk about. What we see here is a picture from the 1963 earthquake in Alaska. It measured 9.2 on the Richter scale. And the reason why we have that here is because something similar is going on in the financial services space. We're seeing a tectonic shift in financial services, and that shift really started way before blockchain got popular. So the 5 trends that are up here, I think some of you in the audience know way more about them than I do. But what we are seeing is that currency and assets, they are becoming digitized. Blockchain, of course, is accelerating that. Automation is going to the decision-making process now. Regulators are opening up payment systems, like, for example, with the PSD2 initiative and open banking in the UK and elsewhere. We are seeing institutional investments on the rise. So I think Societe Generale just created a bond, issued a bond using the public Ethereum ledger I believe. And we are seeing the rise of marketplace lending and funding. Again, Kickstarter came out before the ICO craze really started. It was maybe just fuel on that fire. Our point of view of blockchain in all of this really is that it's open banking on steroids. Anyone is able to interact with any type of digital asset. This is completely new, and the way we see that changing things is that it can act as a common infrastructure layer for how we interact with value. Which brings us to, what is it then that if we are looking at the digital frontier and blockchain, what is it that we in Tradeshift should focus on? So we are already doing connections of ERP data silos. So we are already connecting information across businesses. So in frontiers, and our point of view on blockchain is that really our main effort should be around connecting that information to the actual execution of finance and of payments. So that's what we're working on. And here it's a very, very basic UI, again, because the UI, when you're doing something with blockchain, doesn't really tell you anything, because it's what's going on in the backend that makes a difference. The key point that I would like to make here with this illustration is that there are two types of cash. There's cash that you have in your hand, and then there's cash that will come in at some future point in time. And really what we would like to do, already if we have the invoices on platform, then we're going to be able to predict that. The problem, however, and it's a very basic one, is that if you're a small company and you're dealing with a big company, they have a big incentive to keep the money on their books for longer time because of capital, because of working capital, that they would like to increase that as higher cash flow and improves their share prices. So maybe your ability to actually predict your future cash flow is not going to be very good. But if you can start to actually make the invoice something of an object that takes and executes the payment as well, creating very, very clear rules around when is it, if this is not paid, what is then happening, how are the interest rate accumulated, and what is it that they will need to pay, and you can put that into the actual execution of the payment, then we're doing something extremely interesting for small companies. So that is what we're working on right now. So here is just an illustration that a day goes by and you improve your cash on hand, and that executes. And where we are and what we're working on right now is the prototype of this smart invoices. We also worked on invoice tokenization last year. What we're doing there was called Tradeshift Cash. I think it's still online. You can check that out. But really what Tradeshift did with that was to say, okay, the commercial side of what we were doing there, that was interesting. Please take out the blockchain part, because we can actually go out with existing banking partners and do something with this. So we are exploring now, okay, what is the next thing that we can do? And here, I think it's important, it's just super important to emphasize the first part here, that the standard Tradeshift flow today is that a small company or a big company, they send the invoice through the platform, and there's actually a fairly clear acceptance rule set up before a buyer receives that. So it's also much easier to say, okay, now that invoice is accepted by the buyer, which means that we have a payment intent. And we can start to use that payment intent for all kinds of different things. What we're exploring with Maker is, if we tokenize it, can we then put it into CDPs? And maybe we don't even have to bother with tokenizing it. However, in order to do anything with smart contracts, we need two more building blocks. And that is, we need a document handler. So essentially, this document handler, it takes out the relevant information in the standard Tradeshift flow, and it then enriches it with the blockchain fields that are necessary. So what is the wallet address? What is the transactions ID and stuff like that? And then we have a bridge. I think Oracle could also work. Essentially something that can talk to the blockchain, such that we are able to do the execution of transactions on-chain. And the three broad categories of things we can use this for is, of course, bookkeeping. So I know that some of the big four players are looking into this and exploring that. We can use it for tokenization. And I'll get back to the use cases for that in just a moment. And then we can use it for payment specification and execution. And this is really where, the base layer where we think there's something interesting to explore short term. Which brings us to process efficiency and new business models. And essentially, we have identified 4 broad categories that are worth exploring, and I'll get back to which one that we are working on today. The first one is eliminating double dipping in trade finance. So for those of you who are not familiar with trade finance, it basically is, if I have a number of outstanding invoices, I go to a factorer or I go to a bank, and then I say, I have all these invoices, I'll get paid at some future point in time, and they'll give me money today. Of course, where I don't get $100 for $100, I'll get 99 for 100. And then when the future cash flow comes, I pay, the bank is paid with that. And double dipping then is that I go first to one bank, then I go to the next bank, and then I go to the next bank. And there was a case in China where a couple of Chinese guys, they got away with $3 billion that way. So this is a problem because there's a lot of costs in doing the risk assessments and in understanding whether or not this has been done before. If you have tied very closely the actual execution of payments towards some tokens that are only one per one future dollar, then you have solved that double dipping problem, very similar to the double spending problem that blockchain aims to solve in the first place. So that's process efficiency, because essentially trade finance process will not really change that much because of this. The second one is avoiding a world of pain on reconciliation. So reconciliation essentially is matching your banking statement with what you have in your ERP system. And I'm not joking. The industry short term for doing a payment instruction is pain. So today, you're literally sending pain from your ERP system to the banking system. And what we can do there is integrate those two. So that's the second process efficiency gain that could be had. Again, because we're really not changing a lot of things here, we're just integrating them. So instead of talking about instant payment, we're talking about integrated payments. Third, we're looking at, and this is fairly sci-fi, real-time auditing based on real-time market prices. So really, for starters, let's say that we have tokenized all the invoices that we have. If there's a marketplace for those invoice tokens, then by the construction, we have a real-time price on the value of that part of my books. Generalizing that concept, that we have a market price on all of the assets that we have on our books, we can start to actually have a real-time pricing of our entire balance sheet. So instead of having that and doing that assessment every quarter or every year, you can start to see that real time. And of course, invoices is a fairly simple asset, because usually it's 30, 60, or 90 days out in the future that you have that cash, and it's only dependent on the counterparty risk of the invoices you have. Last but not least, the case that we are currently working on, ecosystem finance, which is about creating early payment system where we go beyond tier ones, you could say. So for example, if I'm a big enterprise here, and here is a tier one supplier, then if we do finance between those two, we call it supply chain finance. The interesting thing is, typically when you're a big enterprise, you have really, really high standards to who can be your suppliers, which means typically they're really good CFOs in the tier one suppliers, and they do not like to take discounts on their future cash flow. But in turn, they are using maybe small companies, so it could be small one-man trucking companies. And these small companies, they do not have a good CFO, because it's a one-man company, so the CFO needs to be a CEO, CFO, CPO, Chief Digital Officer, and whatnot in that same person. And typically he will not be able to negotiate good rates with his bank. But if the tier one supplier is subcontracting this guy over here, and we have a big order and invoice over here that we can use as collateral throughout that system, well, then we can possibly, and we are fairly confident that we can, lower the rates for the tier 2 supplier and tier N supplier. So that's a case that we are working on right now and seeking partners for. So again, that was the 3 key takeaways. Last point I really would like to make, we are looking for partnerships, so please come over and talk. We would love to engage. Thank you.